Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this webinar today. My name is Brad Prather. I work with DWD Technology Group. We are a Sage 100 partner located in Indiana. We provide Sage 100 support services to companies throughout the Midwest, and we're always trying to find ways for Sage 100 users to become more efficient and get the most out of their software system. Today, our friends at VineyardSoft will be showing us how to use Sage Alerts and Workflow to monitor our Sage 100 for any critical business conditions, and then trigger alerts, deliver documents, generate forms, and execute application workflow. A couple housekeeping items. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. You can do that in a couple ways. You can raise your hand using the GoToMeeting tool, or you can type your question into the chat section. We will accumulate those in the chat section and answer those at the end. This presentation itself will be about 40 to 45 minutes with the time at the end then for any questions. We are recording the presentation, and the slides that you're going to see in the presentation will be available afterwards. Don Farber from VineyardSoft will be presenting the webinar today. So Don, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brad, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Don Farber with VineyardSoft. So I'm going to talk to you today about a technology that allows your organization to become more data-driven. I'm going to start out with an overview of that technology, what it is, how folks are using it, how it's licensed and priced, and then we'll jump into the application itself for a brief demonstration. I do want to mention I always use the term Sage 100, and when I do so, I refer to all versions, iterations, environments of Sage 100, whether it's on premises, in a cloud or hosted environment, etc. So let me kick things off by asking you to consider the following. In your Sage 100 system, there's a heck of a lot of information from AR receivables, inventory items, purchase orders, sales orders, etc. And there's a lot that requires your attention. And so today, you probably use some combination of reports, analytics, and queries to keep on top of that information, to figure out who needs to know about it and what kind of action needs to get taken in response to it. Now, what we're going to talk about today is changing that approach somewhat. We're going to talk about investing in a technology that adds on to your Sage ERP solution to enable it to automatically and proactively monitor itself for critical, time-sensitive information and thus automatically trigger the alert and delivery of information to the appropriate people and to automatically execute the appropriate actions in response to the data conditions that have occurred. What we're really talking about here is moving from what I like to term the yellow highlighter approach, and we all know what that is. Someone dumps a report on our desk and we take out our yellow highlighter pen, start paging through that report one page at a time to highlight just those items in the report that require our attention. We're talking about moving from that approach to a data-driven approach where the actual data conditions, activities, and thresholds in your Sage 100 system automatically trigger the appropriate actions and responses. Now, another way to think about this is to ask yourself the following question. When was the last time in your daily business activities you felt like saying, if only we had known? If only we had known about those clients with overdue invoices, we would have done something about it. We would have resent them copies of their invoices. We would have sent them an updated statement. We would have put them on credit hold. We would have notified the appropriate sales rep that one of their clients had become so far past due. And that's just one scenario. If only we had known about leases or contracts that were coming up for renewal, we wouldn't have let them expire and be in the situation that we're in today. If only we had known about these clients of ours who typically buy from us month after month after month, and now all of a sudden a month has gone by, we have not received an order from that customer, and perhaps by the time we do follow up with them, we find that they've taken their business elsewhere. It's exactly those types of scenarios that gave rise to Sage Alerts and Workflow. Now, I tend to refer to alerts in workflow as a smoke detector for your Sage 100 data. You all know why you've got smoke detectors in your house. Well, I would argue that you need a smoke detector type of technology to watch over your Sage 100 data. Now, Sage Alerts and Workflow is developed by VineyardSoft Corporation. It is sold by Sage Software, and it's been on the market now almost 20 years. There are just over 12,000 organizations worldwide using Alerts and Workflow, which make it the most widely used solution of its kind today. Now, although that 12,000 customers number sounds impressive, I think the number after it actually makes it even more impressive. We do all frontline support for Sage Alerts and Workflow, and our technical support department receives an average of just under 9 incoming or new support tickets a day. What that really speaks to is the fact that Sage Alerts and Workflow is a set it and forget it type of technology. Typically, clients who purchase Alerts and Workflow, we don't hear from them but once a year when they renew their annual maintenance and support. Over the years, Alerts and Workflow has been around. It's been the recipient of numerous awards and commendations. You can see those listed at the bottom of the current slide. I'll just take a moment to point out the very last one, Forbes, an organization who know a thing or two about business, gave Alerts and Workflow their commendation for top productivity enhancing tool. Now, one of the most common uses of Alerts and Workflow in the Sage 100 space is to monitor and automate various processes connected with collections, accounts receivables. And there's a very important statistic that you may be familiar with called DSO. It stands for Days Sales Outstanding. It actually measures the efficiency of your management of your collections. The bottom line is the faster that you get paid for the purchases that your clients make, the better it is for your organization, the lower your DSO becomes. And very specifically, Sage Alerts and Workflow enables an organization to lower your DSO. How? By automating virtually all the processes within the invoicing and collections process, by making your staff, your finance department, your sales reps, and in fact your customers more aware of their overdue invoices and balance dues. Sage Alerts and Workflow can prevent additional orders or business from being conducted with customers who haven't paid you for their last business. And so all of this really combines to the use of Alerts and Workflow very specifically to help in the area of accounts receivable. But let me actually go down a layer deeper into the Alerts and Workflow technology and talk about everything that it can do for an organization. Alerts and Workflow begins by monitoring Sage 100 for any business conditions that are important to you. And although I've just spent a couple of moments talking about receivables, Alerts and Workflow monitors and responds to conditions throughout all modules of Sage 100, AR, AP, inventory, GL, purchasing, sales orders, bill of materials, etc. And in fact, out of the box, Alerts and Workflow ships with roughly 85 pre-configured business conditions in Sage 100 that it can monitor for and respond to, including all of the conditions that you see on the current slide. One of my favorite uses of Alerts and Workflow is to tell you about things that should have happened but haven't, such as a repeat customer of yours who has not placed an order with you within the last 15, 30, or 45 days. Now, although we're going to focus today on what Alerts and Workflow can do for Sage 100, it's worth mentioning that Alerts and Workflow is in fact an enterprise-wide solution. So in addition to it monitoring and responding to conditions in Sage 100, if you've got a sales or CRM application, a human resource application, or even homegrown applications, Alerts and Workflow can monitor and respond to conditions in those solutions as well, even going to the extent to be able to identify and respond to conditions between Sage 100 and other applications, and even to the point of monitoring the content of incoming email messages. Now, as its name implies, the first function that Alerts and Workflow provides is the sending of alert messages. Now, most people assume that these alerts are going to get sent via email, and although that is one of the most common alert delivery methods in the product, it's far from the only alert delivery method. sending alerts via text message to cell phone, via instant message, or even simply dynamically publishing and updating web pages with alert details within them, which is what you're looking at right now. This is a single web page that actually contains the details of 3 different business conditions. As you can see, showing monthly sales totals by customer, a list of products that are not selling well in the current month, and simply a list of those orders that have been received today. These web pages are dynamically created and dynamically updated by alerts and workflow. So I mentioned email and instant message and text message. All of these alert delivery methods come with the alerts and workflow solution. You don't have to purchase any additional hardware or software components. Now, sometimes what you really need to send someone as an alert isn't a simple short heads up message, but rather a form or a document. One of the most common uses of alerts and workflow with Sage 100 is the automatic generation and delivery of invoices, statements, purchase orders, picking lists, dunning notices, and the like. Here, we've got an example of alerts and workflow in generating an order confirmation, and that could be in PDF, HTML, or whatever format you want, automatically delivered to the corresponding customer for whom the order was placed. All of your standard forms and documents can be automatically generated and delivered by alerts and workflow. But again, expanding upon the potential content that alerts and workflow can deliver, if, for example, a client has changed their buying habits, what you might wish to receive is a more detailed report that details the customer's sales over the last 3, 6, or 9 months. So alerts and workflow has the ability to automatically generate and deliver all of your analytical reports, whether designed in Crystal reports, Sage Intelligence, Sage Enterprise Intelligence, or even in other reporting applications. Now, these reports can be generated and delivered via email. They can be posted to a website. They can be FTP'd to a commonly accessible location. But I just want to take a moment here to talk about report generation, because it actually falls into 2 categories. And if you look at the first item on this slide, you'll see a reference to both scheduled and triggered reports. You know what a scheduled report is, an AR aging report that might run once a week or once a month, or a daily stock status report, and alerts and workflow can generate and deliver those. But for my money, triggered reports are actually a little bit more exciting, because a triggered report in alerts and workflow is a report that gets generated and delivered only if a corresponding set of business conditions exist. For example, you could say to alerts and workflow, if and when a client has more than $5,000 in due receivables and those are more than 60 or 90 days past due, if and when that happens, I want alerts and workflow to generate my AR aging report specifically for that client, and I want alerts and workflow to deliver that report to that client account manager. And then we come to the final type of content that alerts and workflow can generate and deliver, and those are graphic alerts. I just talked about a customer who has changed their buying habits. Well, yeah, we could generate an analytical report and send that off to the corresponding sales rep. What that sales rep might like even better is a chart or a graph, perhaps a line chart that shows that customer's sales over the last 6, 9, or 12 months. Alerts and workflow embeds a chart design tool, and whether it's bar charts, pie charts, line charts, etc., they can be automatically generated and delivered to the appropriate people, once again, on a scheduled basis or based upon changing business conditions in your Sage 100 application. The final component of alerts and workflow is truly the workflow component. And when we say workflow, we specifically mean the ability for Sage Alerts and Workflow to go back into Sage 100 and actually add or update data. You might say, if and when a client becomes more than 90 days past due, I want alerts and workflow to put that client on credit hold within Sage 100. Or you might say, when an item gets to within 10% of its reorder level, I want alerts and workflow to automatically create a purchase order in 100 for that item. You might even have situations where, based upon conditions in Sage 100, you want alerts and workflow to execute an action to update information in some other database. For example, when a customer is put on credit hold in Sage 100, I might want alerts and workflow to schedule a phone call in my CRM application, such as Sage CRM, Microsoft CRM, or other such solutions, to have the corresponding sales rep contact that client and try and resolve their credit hold status. So, when you consider the types of conditions buried deep within Sage 100, it's kind of nice to know that you can have an invisible assistant in the form of Sage alerts and workflow to automatically take the appropriate response action, to notify the appropriate people, to deliver the corresponding information, and to execute the appropriate response in connection to the business condition or activity or threshold that has occurred. Now, I mentioned earlier that out of the box, Sage Alerts and Workflow ships with roughly 85 pre-configured business scenarios. You can use those, you can customize them, and you can create an unlimited number of additional events, as we call them, yourself. If you happen to be using some other Sage solutions, such as Sage HRMS, Sage CRM, we provide free collections of events for those applications as well. And even beyond the Sage software family of products, we provide these event packs, as we call them, for over 75 other front office and back office applications. So if you are using other solutions within your business, chances are that we might have a collection of pre-configured events for that application as well. So just a brief moment to talk about a particular customer, Toil Inc., who manufactures ink for printing presses. Their big focus initially with alerts and workflow was to automate the collections process. Toil was having a hard time getting their customers to pay on time. They were having to write off a substantial amount of bad debt every month. Toil Inc. came back to us 6 months after implementing alerts and workflow to let us know that they had passed over 20,000 alert messages automatically generated and delivered from alerts and workflow. That number even took us by surprise. But what we found most gratifying from speaking with the folks at Toil Inc. was the return on investment. They actually quantified a savings of over 100 staff hours saved every month through the automation of alerts and workflow, and they saw an increase in their average monthly receivables that were collected by roughly $11,000. So before we get into the products, so you can have a look at how the application operates, I just do want to go over licensing and pricing. Alerts and workflow is not licensed per user. It doesn't matter how many people you have within your organization, doesn't matter how many Sage 100 licenses you have. Instead, alerts and workflow is licensed according to the number of applications you want it to monitor. Let's make this easy for a start. Let's say that you want to use alerts and workflow to monitor your Sage 100 application for an unlimited number of business conditions. Once again, this includes the 85 pre-configured conditions that ship with the application and your ability to create an unlimited number of additional events. With this license, you get the ability to send an unlimited number of alerts to your staff, to your clients, your vendors, and suppliers. Those alerts can be delivered via all of the methods I mentioned: email, instant message, web dashboard, text message, etc. These alerts can include crystal reports, forms, documents, charts, and graphs. And this license also includes the ability to trigger workflow, to write data back into the Sage 100 system, or for that matter, to move data from Sage 100 into any other application database. To do all of that is a one-time license fee of just under $3,300. Again, that's a one-time cost, and then you're looking at just an annual maintenance and support cost of roughly 20%, or $650 per year. And then there are just three options listed down at the bottom of the current slide. Let's say that you also happen to be using Sage CRM and you'd like to use alerts and workflow with your CRM application as well. That counts as an additional application to be monitored, and to do so would cost an additional $1,799. Twice that would enable you to monitor 2 additional applications, such as Sage CRM and perhaps Sage HRMS or Sage ABRA. And 3 times that amount gives you what's called the unlimited connection license of alerts and workflow, enabling you to use it to monitor every single business application that you own today or ever will own. Now, a couple of years back, we surveyed roughly 1,100 alerts and workflow customers to get a sense for how they were using the solution. Many of those scenarios I've shared with you over the last 10 or 15 minutes. We also asked them a number of questions to allow us to gauge how long did it take the average customer to pay off their investment in alerts and workflow. And based upon those 1,100 or so responses, the average ROI time period was just under 3 months at 88 days. Okay. So at this point, you have a sense for what alerts and workflow can do conceptually. Let me take you into the application itself. So, alerts and workflow. A couple of words about the technology in general. First of all, it's what's considered a server-based application. So you typically install it just on one machine within your IT environment. Alerts and workflow does not need a dedicated server. You could put it on your Sage 100 server, on your Exchange server, on your SQL server, or for that matter, even run it on a workstation, which is what I'm demoing it to you from today. Alerts and workflow runs under any Windows-based operating system, so that makes that a mercifully brief conversation. And alerts and workflow stores its data in a choice of 3 different database formats. Microsoft SQL Server, our preferred and most common database format, but we also allow the application to be hosted under SQL Express, which is a free download from Microsoft, as well as Microsoft Access. And folks often say, well, why Access if you already support these other database formats? And our answer is to make the application easy for you to download and try out yourself without having to bother your database administrator. So the way alerts and workflow operates is that you pointed at the various applications or modules that you wish it to monitor. Let's just drill down into accounts receivable for a moment. You tell it about the specific business conditions that you wanted to monitor for and how often you wanted to monitor those various conditions. You turn alerts and workflow on. It runs as a Windows service, again, kind of like that smoke detector analogy, and you walk away from it. It just sits out there constantly monitoring your Sage 100 application for business conditions, thresholds, and activities that are of importance to your organization. Now, let me just back up a couple of steps for a minute and talk about what we have here in our Navigator window. As you can see, I am monitoring various business conditions in a number of modules within Sage 100. I mentioned earlier that alerts and workflow shipped with roughly 85 pre-configured business conditions. Well, just to give you a sense, just within the accounts receivable area alone, you can see a long list of pre-configured business conditions, looking at customers' balances, whether they've been put on or taken off of credit hold, have had their credit limit changed, have invoices that are coming due, are overdue, etc. So again, this is part of the event pack, as we call it, that comes with alerts and workflow for use with Sage 100, and this event pack is entirely free. In addition to monitoring our Sage 100 application, you can see we're also monitoring some data in our sales or CRM application. For those of you who might have Sage CRM or other CRM solutions, this gives you an idea of some of the types of conditions that alerts and workflow can monitor there, as well as in a human resource application, such as Sage HRMS or Sage ABRA, looking at obviously different conditions pertaining to employees, training courses, certifications, and the like. But since we are focusing today's conversation on Sage 100, let's go back to our accounts receivable branch and take a look at the configuration of a couple of events. So we're going to start off on the final event here called Invoices that are overdue, simply because this is one of the most common uses of alerts and workflow with the Sage 100 application. Sad to say, any business that has customers, you can pretty much guarantee that you'll also have customers who are delinquent in paying. Every event, such as this one, has up to 5 components, and you can see them here. The first of those components is telling us whether or not we're currently checking for this event's criteria, and if so, how often. In this case, this event is running every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, those business conditions that are very time sensitive, perhaps like inventory levels, you might check on a more frequent basis, such as hourly, or every 30 minutes, every 5 minutes, or even continuously. And those conditions that are somewhat less time sensitive, such as customer buying trends, well, maybe we check for those criteria, perhaps once a week, once a month, or even the first or last day of every month. You might notice here that although this pop-up window tells me that I'm running this event every day at 9 o'clock in the morning, I can tell you that this event isn't actually running every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's only running on weekdays at 9 o'clock in the morning. In Alerts and Workflow, you can specify what your work days are, what your work hours are, and even what your organization's holidays are. Because if no one's going to be in the office to receive an alert, there's probably no point in having the alert delivered on that day. Now, the second component of every event is its query. This is what identifies the underlying business conditions that you want Alerts and Workflow to monitor for. As you can see here, we're not only looking for invoices that are overdue, but have an overdue balance of greater than $100. Now, everything in Alerts and Workflow is based upon authorizations, and if I am so authorized, I can come in and change that triggering threshold from $100 to $200, $500, $1,000, or whatever I desire. Now, typically, when I start to talk about the Query Designer, someone will often ask, well, okay, I see that I can change that triggering threshold, but what if I need to exclude certain customers from this logic? I know that I always have some customers who are late payers, and I don't want them to be notified by this particular event. So let me take you into the Query Designer itself. You don't have to be a programmer. You're not writing SQL syntax or other code in order to create or customize queries, but you do need to be familiar with an application's database schema. In plain English, you need to know what data sits where in Sage 100. If you've ever written a report for Sage 100, you absolutely have the required expertise. And if you don't, that's okay. The good folks at DWD absolutely do have this expertise, and probably in their sleep for that matter. Alerts and Workflow will show you a list of all of the files or tables in the Sage 100 database, and you can pick and choose what tables you wish to retrieve data from, such as my open invoices. I'm going to skip ahead a couple of tabs because Alerts and Workflow then presents you with a list of fields of data that you might wish to choose for your alert message, such as the invoice number, its date, due date, balance due, etc. And Alerts and Workflow lets you get quite sophisticated in terms of the types of conditions you want to check for. For example, if you wanted to total up all of the overdue invoices per customer, you could simply say to Alerts and Workflow, summarize the value in my balance field. Or if you wanted to derive the average amount of an overdue invoice, Alerts and Workflow can do that for you as well. We even include a calculation wizard that you can access for more sophisticated analysis of your Sage 100 data. But let me skip ahead another couple of tabs to talk about the particular conditions that we want Alerts and Workflow to look for. This particular query has just two. We want to look at only those invoices that have a balance in excess of a certain dollar amount. Everything here is specified in a plain English wizard-driven drop-down format. Once again, you're not having to write any kind of programming code here. Our second condition is specifying that the invoice has to be overdue, and in Sage 100, that means that the invoice's due date is less than the current date. Once again, everything available in plain English from drop-down lists. You can, of course, also specify Boolean logic, ands and ors. You can get very, very sophisticated in terms of the types of conditions you want Alerts and Workflow to check for. And have you ever thought to yourself in Sage 100, I'd really like to know who changed that field and what they changed it from and to? Well, Alerts and Workflow can audit any field or fields in the Sage 100 database simply by coming in here and choosing the field or fields that you wish Alerts and Workflow to audit. It'll immediately begin monitoring that field and capture its values if and when it's changed. Now, just in case we do have any programmers or technical types in the audience with us today, you might be thinking, I wonder what alerts and workflow is doing behind the scenes of this logic. Well, we'll show you. I'm going to click on the SQL tab here to show you this lovely programming code that alerts and workflow is executing. Why am I showing this to you? Because this is what you don't have to know what to do. Alerts and workflow automatically generates all of this wonderful SQL syntax for you automatically based upon the selections that you've made in the preceding tabs. We can even test the results of a query. Let's see if we have any invoices that are past due and have an outstanding balance of greater than $2,000, and in fact, we do. We can see the due dates all back in 2010. They are definitely past due, and we can see the balance due all in excess of $2,000. So yes, this query seems to be working as intended. So let's talk about now what the event is going to do when it finds that there are in fact overdue invoices in Sage 100. First and foremost, let's tell someone about this. Let's tell the customer, the sales rep, and other folks. Well, all of the potential content that you can deliver to someone in the form of an alert is referred to as an event's deliverables. And within the deliverables, we can see such things as the email alert message that gets sent out, the text message that gets delivered, the web dashboard that gets produced, and so on. Let's take a closer look at one of these alert messages. Once again, editing capabilities all based upon user authorizations. So our instant message or text message here is saying this particular invoice number for this particular customer has a balance of this amount and was due on the invoice's due date. Now that looks good to me, but perhaps we want to also include the original invoice date. So let's say dated, and let's find our invoice date field. There it is. Let's choose it. And we have that easily modified this alert message. Now, the number one way for folks to send out alerts today still is good old email. And we often get asked, do you support just plain text emails, or can we create emails in an HTML or more attractive format? And the answer is that we do support both plain text and HTML. And very importantly, we provide you with a library of HTML templates to choose from. You do not have to know how to write your own HTML syntax yourself. But you know, when it comes to an alert message about invoices that are overdue, probably the best thing that I could do would be to regenerate the overdue invoices and send those to the corresponding customers. Well, I've already got an invoice form in Crystal, so Alerts and Workflow lets you use that existing form. So I've just gone to the Reports tab of this event. This is my Crystal invoice form. I'm specifying that I want this form, this invoice, to be output in PDF format. I could also choose other formats such as Word, Excel, or HTML. And so Alerts and Workflow is going to tell Crystal which invoices are past due. Crystal is going to generate my corresponding invoice forms, hand them back to Alerts and Workflow. And as we'll see in just a moment or two, Alerts and Workflow will send that on to the customer. But before we leave this Reports tab, I also want to point out the second report that's been chosen here. This is in fact not a Crystal report, but is rather a chart. So let's have ourselves a quick look at this chart. This is a chart that is going to show us the total overdue invoice amount per sales rep. So it's going to do a sum or a total based on those overdue invoices. Again, this chart design module comes with Alerts and Workflow, no additional purchase necessary, and all of your typical chart types are available for you to select from. But let's have a look at this chart. And what do we got? All right, we have got 4 different sales reps who have overdue invoices, and I can see that one of them in particular, Shelley, I should probably have a speak with her. Her customers have over $500,000 worth of overdue invoices. Now, charts and graphs like this one can be embedded within alert messages, such as email messages. They can be posted to a web page. They can be FTP'd to a commonly accessible location. This event also has one final deliverable. It's actually picking up a Microsoft Word document with instructions on how customers can pay off or pay for their invoices using an online bill payment tool. So all of the content that we can deliver, The next step is to specify whom we want that content to be delivered to. In Alerts and Workflow, an alert recipient is referred to as a subscriber, and this event has 4. We started out by selecting 2 standard subscribers. I use the word standard because you're actually specifying the name of the person or the name of the group whom you wish to notify. Now please note, Sage 100, of course, already stores customers' names, their email addresses, their text messaging numbers, etc. Do you need to re-enter that or import it into Alerts and Workflow? Absolutely not. Alerts and Workflow will read that subscriber data dynamically out of your Sage 100 database. Now, I've chosen to notify everyone in my finance group, and by the way, these groups are, of course, customizable by you. I'm notifying them via email and fax and instant message. I often like to joke that you can really annoy the heck out of someone with Alerts and Workflow if you put your mind to it. Myself, I'm being notified via just 2 methods, email and instant message. But here's something to note. In my case, if I receive an alert Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., I get notified at my VineyardSoft or primary email address. But if an alert does need to get sent to me on Saturdays, Sundays, or before or after work hours, I've actually given myself an alternate or secondary email address that uses my personal Gmail account. Now again, going back to the subject of this event, invoices that are overdue, I think you'd agree that the 2 most important people to notify about invoices that are past due would be the customer and the customer's sales rep. And you see them both specified here, referred to as dynamic recipients because obviously they're going to change based upon which invoices are past due when this event runs. The final component of an event is its workflow actions. And this is where an event has the ability to go back into Sage 100 and put a delinquent customer on credit hold. This is where Alerts and Workflow could take data out of Sage 100, push it into Sage CRM or a sales application to perhaps schedule a follow-up phone call or contact. Now, very important note about this actions branch. It is covered under a separate or additional layer of security. When it comes to writing data back into a database, you need to be doubly sure that the people who have access to this option know what they're doing and are so authorized to set up these kinds of actions. Now, these actions are a combination of some wizard-driven tools and some programming APIs, such as an embedded Visual Basic scripting engine. And in our upcoming version 10 release that's coming out in Q4 of this year, we'll be adding the ability to make web service calls also to this list of actions. Since I've mentioned our upcoming version 10 release, I just want to make one other mention about it. As you can see, the current user interface for Alerts and Workflow is a Windows-based UI. In our version 10 product, we'll also be offering a purely web-based user interface to the Alerts and Workflow solution. Now, before we leave the Alerts and Workflow product, I just want to make a couple other notes about a few things here. First off, you see a branch called ERP Dashboards. These dashboards are web pages that get automatically published and dynamically updated by Alerts and Workflow on whatever reoccurring interval you wish. So imagine someone up in finance can have a window up that says, here are all the invoices that are due for payment today, or here's a list of all the invoices that are about to become past due. Someone down in shipping could have a web page up that says, here's a list of all of the orders that need to be shipped today. And even another window that says, here's a list of all of our back orders that are awaiting receipt of a delivery from one of our suppliers. I also want to point out an example of just how sophisticated Alerts and Workflow can be when it comes to detecting conditions in Sage 100. Automated trend analysis. Let's take a look at this particular event. Let me walk you through what this event is doing. This event, if we had it activated, would run on the first day of every month, the first work day of a month. And what this event does is it starts out by looking at what each customer purchased for the month just ended. Then this event goes 6 months back for each customer to figure out what each customer's average monthly purchase amount would be based upon that preceding 6 months of history. And then Alerts and Workflow for each customer compares what that customer purchased for the month just ended versus their average monthly purchase. And if for the month just ended, a customer's sales have dropped by at least 30%, then, and only then, will Alerts and Workflow send an alert message to the corresponding salesperson. And let's take a look at that alert. It's in plain text, as easy as could be, and it says, "Dear salesperson, this customer of yours has placed orders for the previous month to date that represents a decrease of at least 30% over their average month." And we're showing just data. We are showing for that customer their last month's sales, their average monthly sales, and then the decrease, shown both as a dollar amount and as a percentage. Just imagine how useful that would be for a salesperson to come into their office on the first workday of a month and have one or more emails or text messages or even dashboards waiting for them to say, "Here are your customers who have significantly changed their buying habits." Okay, so let's jump back into our PowerPoint just to finish up with a few last slides, and then we'll open things up for Q&A. It's important to note, and I know I mentioned this earlier, that although we've been focusing on Sage Alerts and Workflow specifically for Sage 100, Alerts and Workflow integrates with all of your other business applications as well. So if you have add-ons to Sage 100, sales tax computation, document management, etc., Alerts and Workflow works with those solutions. It can monitor that data as well and trigger corresponding alerts and workflow. Alerts and Workflow also operates with other business applications outside of the Sage software world. So if, for example, you have a customer service application from a vendor outside of Sage, as long as that application stores its data in a relational database, Alerts and Workflow can monitor that data and respond to it. And don't forget, incoming email. Alerts and Workflow also has the ability to monitor the content of incoming email messages to see who they're from, to look through the body of the email to determine what the email is in regards to, and even take contents of that email message and use it to update records in your ERP or CRM databases. So this truly is an enterprise-wide solution. So with all of that information, and I know it's a lot, how would you proceed with determining if Alerts and Workflow is a beneficial application for your organization? Well, what we would recommend is that you start out by asking yourself just 7 questions, and they are these. Do you have a lot of date-sensitive data in your business that you need to know about when those dates are upcoming, are here, or in the past? Do you have critical business thresholds that should drive business actions? If a customer gets to within 10% of their credit limit, then I want that customer automatically put on credit hold. Do you have business conditions or activities that should take place but sometimes don't, and that inactivity is absolutely important for you to know about? Does your organization as a whole focus to some degree on exception management? We're all strapped for resources these days. We don't need to know about all the things that are going right in our business. We need to know about just those few things that are going wrong. Do you use trend analysis to identify your clients who have changed their buying habits or items that are not selling as well as they used to? Do you need to know when certain critical business information in Sage 100 has changed, such as a credit limit for a customer or their credit status, or an item's MSRP in inventory? And finally, do you have one or more repetitive processes that are currently being done manually, such as the generation and delivery of invoices, statements, dunning notices, purchase orders, and the like, and that you could certainly save a lot of time if those processes were automated? So if you're like a lot of organizations, I don't think it'll be too difficult for you to find at least 3 of those questions that you answer with a yes. But there's one more tool that you can actually get even more specific to determine how and where Sage Alerts and Workflow can help your organization. If you go to the Sage Alerts and Workflow website, and that website is simply alertsandworkflow.com, all spelled out, right in the middle of the home page, you're going to see a question that says, does your organization need alerts and workflow? Click here to find out. That will take you into what's called the Alerts and Workflow Needs Assessment. This is a tool that takes roughly 7 minutes for you to go through from start to finish. It asks you a series of questions about your business processes, and your current degree of automation. And when you're done answering those questions, the needs assessment presents you with a report card. A report card that shows you, for all of the different capabilities and functionality that Sage Alerts and Workflow can provide, what aspects are most important, would provide the greatest benefit to your organization. There's no cost to go through this needs assessment. It is self-delivered, so no one else needs to know what you're typing in as far as your answers. You can even go through it multiple times if you so wish. Again, it's available from the alertsandworkflow.com website. And so with that, I did promise to leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So let me stop speaking for now and turn things back over to my DWD colleagues, Brad and Sherry.
Thanks, Don. Thank you very much. Okay, so does anybody have any questions for for Don? And I'm going to check the chat here to see if anybody put any in there or in the questions section. And all right, so let me see if I can get this one here. I've got a question. Can reports be scripted to be dropped into an FTP site?
Excellent question. The answer is yes, they can. One of the delivery methods that is available to you in Alerts and Workflow is called copy. And when we say copy in the Alerts and Workflow application, what we really mean is FTP. So absolutely yes. Reports, charts, graphs, forms, documents, all of the content that Alerts and Workflow can generate can be dropped into an FTP site. So the answer is a very enthusiastic yes to that question.
Okay, I have another question wanting to know about the average time, if you will, to install, implement, get up and running Sage Alerts and Workflow.
Oh, that's an excellent question. So let me do my best to answer that. Of course, the answer is a little bit of it depends, because it depends upon what a particular organization wishes to do with the application. But having said that, I always recommend to prospective users of Alerts and Workflow the old adage of walk before you run. So I always recommend that. Although you can think of a number of different uses for Alerts and Workflow, I recommend always starting out by installing and configuring the application to watch for a set number of business conditions, thresholds, activities, etc., and trigger alerts. Yes, we can use Alerts and Workflow to generate forms, documents, reports, charts, graphs, and all that sort of stuff, but let's hold off on that until you get what I consider to be kind of the base product installed and running. Now, Alerts and Workflow uses the standard Windows installation procedure. So the install is dead easy, takes just a couple of minutes. The only thing you're prompted to specify is where you want to install the Alerts and Workflow solution. And so if we take that plus, let's say that you want to activate somewhere between 6 and 12 alerts, most of those coming from the pre-configured ones that ship with the product, but even allowing for you to create or a couple of your own or customize those. So let's take an average number of 9. So let's say that you want to activate, customize, and enable 9 events to send out alerts to the appropriate recipients, and let's just say for starters via email. And let's say that's your initial goal for installing Alerts and Workflow. To do that is going to take around 4 hours of time. So about half a day. If you want to be really safe, you could say a day at most. But again, because there's so much that comes pre-configured in the Alerts and Workflow solution, just to get the application up and running, triggering email alerts for 9 to 10 of those scenarios. Again, half a day's worth of time should be, really is more than ample for you to get the application to that point. Obviously, then you can look into adding components, other alert delivery methods, generating crystal reports, etc. But if you take a look at that approximate 4 hours or so to get the application installed, configured, triggering alerts for production purposes, that's a very safe estimate.
Okay. Now we are starting to get some questions come in. Looks like we have a follow-up question regarding the FTP. Does the application have an FTP server?
The application, what it has is a, well, actually, I'm going to take the short way to answer that. It has a designated or dedicated process that actually performs the FTPing function. So I think the appropriate answer to that question is yes, that it doesn't require a third-party tool to actually FTP the report to the appropriate location. That's built into the product. Well, I would have to say the answer to that question is yes. One thing that I do know that I can add as an additional piece of information, the application in its current release, that's version 9, supports FTP, but there is a kind of an enhanced version of FTP called SFTP or Secure FTP, and that was not supported in version 9. It is supported in version 10. Version 10 is actually in the QA process currently. Again, that's going to be released in Q4 of this year, so coming quite soon. So I wanted just to make that clarification regarding FTP versus SFTP as well.
Okay. Okay, here's another question. Can Sage Alerts and Workflow be used to create an alert within Sage on the Sage screen? And for example, a sales order doesn't meet a certain criteria, and the user is informed of that on the Sage screen. I'm guessing it's maybe kind of a pop-up or something right there about that sales order.
Right. So the answer to that question is kind of a no with an asterisk, or perhaps even a no/yes. And let me explain what I mean by that. We don't have the ability to pop up a window right within the Sage application with alert details. We can pop up a window that, for example, like a typical system error warning that might pop up on your screen. So pop-up messages using kind of a system pop-up tool to display that message. Alerts and Workflow does provide that. It also does provide the ability to do IM, or instant message alerts, which is really the most common form of pop-up that folks use with Alerts and Workflow today. Now, having said all of that, I actually would have to turn the question around a little bit, and although not perhaps directly to the person who's asking this, but perhaps to Brad, because I'm not familiar enough with the tools that are inside of Sage 100, because I do know, for example, that Alerts and Workflow can dynamically populate a web page with alert details. So if Sage 100 itself provides the ability from within the Sage 100 application to display the details of a web page, of an HTML page, then I'm actually going to go back and revise my answer to yes, in that case, that those details could be displayed right from within the Sage 100 application. But it really depends upon whether Sage 100 itself would allow for a web page, an HTML page, to be displayed from within its own user interface.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good question. I'll tell you, and I know that this is a Sage Alerts and Workflow webinar, but I might add from the Sage 100 side, it does have the custom office tool, which I know that we can write scripts, and I have actually seen that done before via scripting within custom office to put some criteria on there and pop up a message, for example, a window that does that. So those are a couple options there, I think.
Excellent. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Keep going down here. How is Sage Alerts and Workflow? Oh, okay. Actually, I'm going to answer this one. Don said, how's this different from Knowledge Sync? And I guess I'm going to say they're not, right? It's just a branding issue. I think if I'm correct there, they were actually the same.
They are absolutely the same, Brad. You're quite right. It is just a branding issue. When sold through Sage software, the product is referred to as Sage Alerts and Workflow. Our internal name for the product here at VineyardSoft is indeed Knowledge Sync. The technology is 100% the same.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so I'm kind of scrolling down here. I don't have any other questions in the questions section, so if you'll bear with me here, I'm going to go look at the chat section. There's nothing in there, and I'm going to look at my attendees to see if anyone has a hand up. At this point in time, I don't have any hands up, so I'm going to guess one more time here.
Sure, Brad. You know, I just want to mention one last comment from my side, and that is something that is very specific to Sage 100. As most folks know, Sage 100 stores its data in a database called ProvideX. And sometimes that database can be a little bit challenging in terms of retrieving data from it, or the speed of retrieval, or doing more sophisticated analysis of data in that particular database format. So it's worth my mentioning for everyone who is using Sage 100 in that ProvideX database format, that Alerts and Workflow ships with a little database optimization engine. Comes with the product at no additional cost. We actually built it specifically to address some limitations that were inherent in the Sage 100 database. I just wanted to convey that to everyone because if you've ever run into any of these issues, some slow response time in terms of doing some analysis, we've actually overcome that challenge with this database optimization engine.
And I will second that. For what it's worth, any Sage Alerts, Knowledge Sync implementation that I do, that's standard and automatic in using that particular linking function in that database there, because it does just make it not only from a performance issue, but just in writing those queries. I believe that you saw a little bit of it that Don was doing there, makes those much easier. So.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate the confirmation there.
No, you're welcome. Okay, I show no more questions. If that is all, if everybody's got all their questions answered, I'd like to thank Don for presenting the webinar. I hope you were able to gain some information out of that. As I said, this was recorded, so we'll have that recording. If you like, we also have the slides. Don has offered, if you have those, would like those slides, I should say, to be able to look at those. He said he would be willing to share those as well. And always, we at DWD here, we're more than happy to also, if you'd like to call us directly, send us an email, you can do that as well. So, Sherry, I'm going to, I guess, see if there's anything else you need to do or say here as far as our webinar is concerned. And is Sherry still here?
I'm guessing that's a no, Brad.
Okay. All right.
Well, thanks so much.
Okay. You're very welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending. As I said, I'm going to now end the meeting. If you have any questions or anything, you can forward those to us. I would not be surprised, actually, if you probably don't receive something from Sherry regarding some feedback on today's webinar. So again, thank you everyone for taking the time to attend it, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.